Rain slid down the hospital windows like the city itself was crying. Inside the emergency wing, fluorescent lights hummed over a man in a janitor's uniform standing frozen near the trauma bay doors. Ethan Cole's hands still trembled. Just minutes ago, he had pressed his lips to a stranger's, an act so desperate, so instinctive. It barely felt real now. Doctors rushed past him, shouting codes, wheels screeching against tile. Somewhere beyond those doors lay a woman worth billions, her life hanging by a breath he had helped give back. Ethan swallowed hard, thinking of his daughter asleep at home, unaware her father's life had just collided with another world entirely. Before the story pulls you any deeper, let me ask you something quietly personal. Where are you listening from right now? What city, what corner of the world? It still amazes me how one moment, one story, can travel so far. Leave your place below, and let's feel how connected we really are. Ethan hadn't planned to be a hero that night. He never planned much anymore. Life, after his wife's passing 3 years earlier, had become a routine of survival. Wake before dawn, pack Lily's lunch with careful notes drawn in marker, drop her at school, then clock in at St. Mary's Hospital, where the floors never stayed clean for long. He liked the quiet hours best, when the halls echoed softly and grief felt less loud. That night shift had started like any other. Ethan pushed his cart down the cardiology corridor, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. A storm raged outside, thunder rolling low and heavy. He remembered thinking how storms always made Lily nervous, how she probably crawled into his bed by now. Then he heard the scream. It cut through the hallway, raw, terrified. Ethan dropped his mop and ran. Near the glass doors of the private wing, a woman had collapsed. Her umbrella lay snapped beside her, rainwater pooling under her designer coat. She was pale, lips tinged blue, one hand clutching her chest as if trying to hold her heart in place. "Help! Please," she gasped. Ethan knelt beside her without thinking. Hey, I'm here. You're going to be okay." His voice shook, but his hands were steady, just like when Lily scraped her knees. He shouted for help, but the hallway was empty. The storm had delayed staff. Elevators were stalled. The woman's breathing turned shallow, then stopped. For one terrifying second, Ethan froze. Then instinct, raw and desperate, took over. He remembered the CPR class the hospital required even janitors to take. He tilted her head, checked for breath. Nothing. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. Come on, he whispered, starting compressions, counting under his breath. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. He hesitated only a second before sealing his mouth over hers. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't gentle. It was survival. Her chest rose. Once. Twice. Then she coughed violently, sucking in air as if breaking the surface of deep water. Her eyes flew open, wild and confused. Ethan leaned back, breathless, tears burning behind his eyes. Staff finally poured in nurses, doctors, a gurney. Someone pulled Ethan aside as they rushed her away. "Sir, are you family?" a nurse asked. He shook his head, still dazed. "No, I just clean here." Hours later, he sat alone in a plastic chair, uniform soaked, hands clasped together. He learned her name by accident, overhearing 2 doctors whisper, "Grace Whitmore." Even Ethan knew that name. Tech mogul, investor, one of the richest women in the country. The realization hit him like cold water. He laughed softly, almost bitterly. A single dad janitor and a billionaire, connected by one breath, one reckless kiss meant to keep death away. He didn't stay to be thanked. By dawn, Ethan was back on the bus home, watching the city wake up through fog glass. He thought that would be the end of it. A strange story he'd never tell, a secret tucked between him and the rain. He was wrong, because when Grace Whitmore opened her eyes later that morning, the first thing she asked wasn't about her company or her fortune, but about the man who had kissed life back into her body. And somewhere across town, Ethan unlocked his apartment door, unaware that everything he thought he understood about fate, kindness, and love was already beginning to shift. Morning light crept into Ethan's apartment through thin curtains, painting soft lines across the cluttered living room. Toys were scattered near the couch. A half-finished science project rested on the kitchen table, and the smell of instant coffee filled the air. Lily padded out of her room in socks too big for her feet, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, you're home early," she murmured. Ethan forced a smile and knelt, opening his arms. She climbed into him easily, like she always did, her small body fitting perfectly against his chest. For a moment, the world felt steady again. "Couldn't sleep," he said quietly. "Storm kept me awake." She nodded, accepting it without question. Children had a way of trusting the half-truths adults offered. As she ate breakfast, chatting about a spelling test and a boy who pulled her braids, Ethan watched her with an ache that never left. Everything he did, every shift, every sacrifice, was for this ordinary, precious morning. At the hospital, things were anything but ordinary. Grace Whitmore lay in a private recovery room, surrounded by machines that hummed and blinked like vigilant sentinels. Her assistant stood near the window on a phone call, voice hushed and tense. A cardiologist reviewed charts at the foot of the bed. Grace stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The darkness closing in, the strange warmth, the taste of rain and fear and life itself. "Find him," she said suddenly, her voice hoarse. Her assistant paused. "Find who?" "The man, the janitor." Grace turned her head slowly. "The one who saved me." The room fell quiet. He performed CPR before the team arrived, the doctor confirmed. If he hadn't, the outcome would have been very different. Grace swallowed hard. She had built empires, crushed boardrooms, negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, but the thought of how close she'd come to dying alone on a hospital floor made her hands tremble beneath the sheets. "I want to thank him," she said, personally. By noon, the hospital buzzed with quiet curiosity. Word spread fast. About the billionaire patient, about the janitor who'd stepped in. Ethan felt in the sideways glances, the sudden politeness from staff who'd barely known his name before. He tried to keep his head down, scrubbing floors like always. "Ethan, a nurse called." He looked up, heart sinking. "Yes." "She's asking for you." The walk to Grace's room felt longer than any hallway he'd ever cleaned. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor. His uniform was still faintly stained from the night before, despite his best efforts. When he stepped inside, Grace turned toward him slowly. Their eyes met. For a second, neither spoke. "You saved my life," she said finally. Ethan cleared his throat. "I just did what anyone would have done." She studied him, not with the distant gaze of someone used to being admired, but with something softer, something searching. "No," Grace replied. Not everyone would have stayed. Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Machines beeped quietly, filling the space where words failed. "If you were standing there in that moment, let me ask you honestly, what would you have done? Would you have stepped in, even afraid, even unsure? Tell me below what your heart says now. And if you can't find the words, just tap like, to remind the world that compassion still shows up when it matters most." Ethan shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. "I should get back to work," he said. Grace frowned. "Please, just 1 minute." She reached for a glass of water, her hand trembling. Without thinking, Ethan stepped forward and helped her, his movements gentle, practiced. Their fingers brushed. Something flickered between them, recognition, maybe, or gratitude deep enough to feel like connection. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people," Grace said quietly. "But last night, when I couldn't breathe, it felt like no one was there. Until you." Ethan didn't know what to say. He thought of nights holding Lily through fevers, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "showing up is all we can do." Grace smiled faintly. "I'd like to return the favor." He shook his head quickly. "I didn't do it for anything." "I know," she replied. "That's why it matters." Later that day, Ethan clocked out and rushed to Lily's school pickup. Life didn't pause just because fate had brushed past him. He helped Lily with homework, listened to her ramble about planets, and cooked box mac and cheese like it was a feast. But that night, as he tucked her in, Lily looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, why do you look sad and happy at the same time?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know," he admitted. Sometimes big things happen, and we don't know what they mean yet. She yawned. I think it means you're brave. After she fell asleep, Ethan sat alone on the couch, the city glowing faintly beyond the window. Somewhere across town, Grace Whitmore lay awake too, staring into the dark, thinking not of stocks or headlines, but of a man with tired eyes and a kind heart who had changed everything without meaning to. And neither of them realized that this was only the beginning of a story that would test their pasts, their fears, and what they were willing to risk for love. The first letter arrived 3 days later. It was slipped under Ethan's apartment door sometime between dinner and bedtime, the envelope thick and cream-colored, his name written neatly in dark ink. No return address. He stared at it for a long moment, heart thudding for reasons he couldn't explain. Inside was a simple note. Ethan, I hope this doesn't feel intrusive. I asked the hospital for a way to reach you, not to overwhelm you, but because gratitude shouldn't be silent. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. Just coffee. Nothing more. Grace. His fingers tightened around the paper. Coffee. Nothing more. For someone like Grace Whitmore, nothing more could still mean everything changing. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, telling himself he'd think about it tomorrow. Tomorrow came with rain again. At work, Ethan moved through his tasks on autopilot. His mind drifted backward, to years before hospitals and janitor carts, back when his life had been simpler, louder, warmer. Back when there was Anna. She had been sunshine in human form, always humming, always believing things would work out. They met young, married faster than anyone advised, and struggled together in a tiny apartment where love filled the cracks money couldn't. When Lily was born, Ethan thought his heart had reached its limit. Then cancer arrived like a thief in the night. The months that followed were a blur of beeping machines, whispered prayers, and promises Ethan made with shaking hands. When Anna died, something in him closed quietly, like a door he never tried to reopen. He took the janitor job at St. Mary's because it kept him close to where she took her last breath, because cleaning felt like a way to make peace with a place that had taken so much. Grace Whitmore, meanwhile, was discovering the cost of surviving. The doctors told her she'd push her body too far. Endless flights, sleepless nights, stress she wore like armor. You're not invincible, one said gently. Grace almost laughed. Invincibility had been her shield since childhood. Raised by a mother who believed vulnerability was weakness, Grace learned early to rely only on herself. She built her empire brick by brick, never slowing long enough to feel the loneliness that followed her success like a shadow. But lying in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had knelt beside her without knowing her name. The man who expected nothing. 2 days later, Ethan finally replied. Coffee is fine, he wrote, simple and cautious. 1 hour. They met at a small cafe near the river, not the kind Grace's world frequented. She arrived without security, wearing a plain coat and nervous eyes. Ethan almost didn't recognize her without the hospital lights and machines. She stood when she saw him. Thank you for coming. He nodded. Thank you for the letter. They sat across from each other, steam curling up from their cups. Outside, the river moved steadily, unconcerned with who they were. I don't usually do things like this, Grace admitted. I'm better with contracts than conversations. Ethan smiled faintly. I'm better with floors and feelings. That mayor laugh, a real laugh, surprised and soft. Something loosened between them. They talked about small things at first. Lily, Grace's favorite books as a child. Ethan's exhaustion. Grace's fear of sleeping alone since the incident. Then, slowly, the deeper truth surfaced. I was there when my wife died. Ethan said quietly, eyes fixed on his cup. I couldn't save her. Grace listened, not interrupting. So when I saw you, I didn't think. I just acted. I guess part of me needed to know I could still help someone. Grace swallowed hard. I've had people around me my whole life, she said. But when I needed someone most, it was a stranger who stayed. Have you ever had someone show up for you when no one else did, when you felt invisible or lost? If that's true for you, write yes below and tell me their name. Sometimes remembering them is a way of saying thank you, even years later. The hour passed unnoticed. When they stood to leave, something hesitant lingered in the air. "I don't want this to feel like charity," Grace said carefully. "But if you ever need anything—" Ethan raised a hand gently. "I need things to stay simple." She nodded, respecting it. "Then maybe just coffee again sometime?" He hesitated, then agreed. As weeks passed, coffee became routine. Conversations grew easier. Lily met Grace accidentally one afternoon when Ethan had to pick her up early. Grace crouching down to Lily's level, asking about planets with genuine curiosity. "Is she your friend?" Lily asked later. Ethan didn't answer right away. But happiness rarely arrives without warning pain. One evening, Ethan found a letter from Lily's school about a field trip he couldn't afford. The same night, his landlord left a notice, rent increasing next month. Ethan sat at the table long after Lily slept, the weight of quiet crushing him. Across town, Grace stared at her phone, rereading a message she'd typed and erased a dozen times. "If I help him, will you think I pity him? If I don't, am I walking away again?" Two lives, two fears, circling the same truth from different sides. And somewhere between pride and kindness, a choice was forming, one that would test them both far more than a kiss ever could. Ethan took a second job without telling anyone. It started with night deliveries, packages stacked in the back of a borrowed van, routes scribbled on a notepad. He told himself it was temporary, just until the rent stabilized, just until Lily's school expenses evened out. But exhaustion crept in fast, settling into his bones. Mornings blurred. Coffee lost its effect. His smiles for Lily grew thinner, practiced. Grace noticed. "You're quieter lately," she said one afternoon as they sat on a park bench, watching Lily chase pigeons with reckless joy. "Did I say something wrong?" Ethan shook his head. "No, just tired." Grace studied his face, the faint shadows under his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. She recognized that look. She wore it herself for years, hidden beneath tailored suits and confidence. "Ethan," she said carefully, "you don't have to carry everything alone." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm used to it." That night, after Lily fell asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Ethan opened the bills again. Numbers stared back at him, unforgiving. His chest tightened, not with panic, but with something heavier. Shame. He thought of Grace's world, clean, expansive, cushioned by choices he'd never have. He pushed the thought away. Pride wasn't luxury. It was survival. The next day, Grace made a decision. She didn't call. She didn't text. She showed up. Ethan opened his apartment door to find her standing there, holding a paper bag that smelled like warm bread. "I hope this isn't too forward," she said softly. "I brought dinner." He hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment felt smaller with her in it, more lived in, more real. Grace noticed everything. Lily's drawings taped the fridge, the cracked corner of the wall, the careful way Ethan folded laundry while they talked. "This place feels loved," she said. "It's home," Ethan replied. After dinner, while Lily colored the table, Grace finally spoke. "I want to help." Ethan's hand stilled. "Grace." "Not like that," she interrupted gently. "Not a handout. I have a foundation that supports education and families. Scholarships, housing assistance. It's already there." Silence stretched between them. Ethan felt a familiar wall rise in his chest. "I don't want Lily growing up thinking people only help if they're rich enough." Grace knelt beside Lily, watching her color. "I grew up thinking love had to be earned," she said quietly. "I was wrong. Now it's your turn to pause with them for a moment. Think of one small good thing you've done recently. Something kind, even if no one noticed. Share below, not to brag, but to remind others that goodness still moves quietly through the world. Your moment might be exactly what someone else needs tonight." Ethan looked at Grace, really looked at her. Not the billionaire, not the survivor. Just a woman trying to give without taking dignity away. "I'll think about it," he said. That night, Grace cried alone in her car. Not because he refused, but because he hadn't. Because hope had slipped in, unwanted and powerful. Days later, Lily came home with a flyer, an advanced science program she'd been nominated for. The cost made Ethan's stomach drop. Grace found him staring at it. "She's brilliant," Grace said. "Let her fly." The choice pressed down on him. His pride, Lily's future. That night, Ethan dreamed of Anna. She stood in the kitchen, smiling gently. "You don't have to do everything yourself anymore," her eyes seemed to say. The next morning, Ethan called Grace. "Okay," he said simply, "but on one condition. Anything. I keep my job. I stay me." Grace smiled through tears. "Deal." The help came quietly. No headlines. No announcements. Lily's program. A stabilized lease. Breathing room. And with it came something unexpected. Joy. Ethan laughed more. Slept better. Grace visited often, not as a savior, but as someone who belonged. Lily adored her, asking questions about space and business with equal enthusiasm. But happiness has a way of attracting attention. A photo surfaced online. Grace Whitmore leaving a modest apartment building. The caption speculated wildly. Blogs twisted kindness into scandal. Grace's board panicked. "This relationship is a liability," they warned. "Your image." Grace listened, jaw tight. She'd fought battles before. But this one felt different. Because now, walking away wouldn't just cost her reputation. It would cost her something real. Ethan read the headlines alone, late at night. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with resignation. He'd known this world would never accept someone like him. He began to pull back, canceling coffee, avoiding calls. Grace felt the distance immediately. "What's happening?" she asked one evening, voice breaking. Ethan looked away. "I don't want to be the reason they tear you apart." Grace stepped closer. "You're not a reason. You're a person. But fear is louder than truth sometimes." And as the space between them grew, both wondered the same thing in silence. Was kindness enough to survive the world watching? The call came just after midnight. Ethan's phone buzzed on the kitchen table, rattling against a stack of unpaid envelopes he hadn't thrown away yet. Habits of fear linger longer than fear itself. He stared at the screen, Grace's name glowing softly. And for a moment he didn't move. He already knew something was wrong. "Ethan," Grace said the second he answered. Her voice wasn't calm like before. It was thin, fractured. "I need you to hear this from me, not from the news." His chest tightened. "Hear what?" There was a pause, just long enough for dread to settle in. "My board voted tonight," she said. "They're forcing me to step down as CEO. Temporarily, they say. But we both know what that means." The words landed heavy, sinking deep. "You're losing your company?" Ethan asked quietly. "I'm losing control," Grace replied. "Because I wouldn't deny knowing you. Because I wouldn't pretend you were a mistake." Ethan closed his eyes. Every fear he'd buried clawed its way to the surface. This was exactly what he'd been trying to prevent. "I never wanted this," he said, voice rough. "I never wanted to cost you anything." "You didn't," Grace insisted. "They did." But the guilt was already flooding him. Images flashed through his mind. Lily laughing with Grace, the safety that had crept into their lives, the fragile happiness that now felt like it had been borrowed on credit. "Grace, maybe it would be easier if we stopped," he said, hating himself for the words even as he spoke them. "At least until things settle." Silence. When she spoke again, her voice broke. "Do you really think walking away will make this hurt less?" He had no answer. They didn't say goodbye properly. The call ended with unfinished sentences hanging in the air, heavy as rain clouds that never quite burst. The next morning, headlines exploded. Billionaire CEO steps down amid personal scandal. Who was the mystery man? Paparazzi crowded Grace's building. Reporters speculated freely. Gold digger, secret affair, manipulation. The truth didn't matter. It never did. Grace sat alone in her penthouse, curtains drawn, the silence deafening. For the first time in decades, she had nowhere to be. No meetings. No power. Just consequences. Across town, Ethan scrubbed the hospital floors harder than necessary, trying to drown out the voices in his head. He avoided Grace's calls. avoided Lily's questions when she asked why Miss Grace hadn't visited. That night, Lily found him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at nothing. "Did I do something bad?" she asked softly. Ethan's heart shattered. He pulled her into his arms. "No, baby, never." "Then why does it feel like someone left?" she whispered. He didn't answer, because he didn't trust his voice not to break. Days passed, then weeks. Grace faded from public view. Ethan returned fully to survival mode. Long shifts, quiet dinners, careful smiles. Life shrank again, like it always did after hope dared to grow. One evening, as Ethan took out the trash, a familiar car pulled up. Grace stepped out, looking smaller somehow. No makeup, no entourage, just her. "I know you didn't want to talk," she said, standing a few feet away. "But I couldn't disappear without saying this to your face." Ethan swallowed. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," she said, "but I needed you to understand something." She met his eyes, steady despite the tears. Losing the company hurts. Losing control hurts. But none of it hurts as much as you deciding I wasn't worth the fight. The words cut deep. "I was trying to protect you," he said. "I didn't need protection," Grace replied. "I needed honesty." A long silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. "I chose you," she continued softly. "Not because you saved my life, but because you showed me how to live one." Ethan's defenses crumbled. He saw it then. This wasn't about money or worlds colliding. It was about two broken people afraid of costing each other too much. If this loss hit you hard too, let me ask you gently, leave a red heart below. Sometimes a single symbol can carry the weight of empathy when words feel too small. Grace took a shaky breath. "I don't know what happens next. I just know I didn't regret meeting you. Not once." Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "Neither did I." She nodded, accepting what he couldn't yet give. "Then that's enough for now." She walked back to her car, leaving behind silence, and a truth Ethan could no longer ignore. Because losing her hadn't saved either of them. It had only proven how much she mattered. Sleep abandoned Ethan completely after that night. He lay awake listening to the refrigerator hum, the distant sirens weaving through the city like unanswered questions. Grace's words echoed again and again, "I chose you." They pressed against his chest until breathing felt like work. At dawn, he sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, staring at a crayon drawing Lily had taped there weeks ago. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands. One was labeled Daddy. One was me. The third had no name, just a question mark and a heart. Ethan closed his eyes. At the hospital, the world shifted in a way he hadn't expected. Nurses whispered. Supervisors avoided his gaze. Then, near the end of his shift, he was called into the administration office. "Ethan," the director said carefully, folding her hands. "There have been concerns." "Concerns," he echoed. "Media attention," she continued. "We're a hospital. We have to protect our reputation." His stomach dropped. "I never spoke to anyone." "We know," she said softly, "but perception matters. We're putting you on unpaid leave. For now, unpaid." The word rang in his ears. He walked home in a daze, the city too loud, too bright. When he opened the apartment door, Lily ran to him, smiling. "You're home early," she said. He forced a grin. "Guess I am." That night, after Lily fell asleep, Ethan finally broke. He sat on the floor of the living room, back against the couch, and cried, silent, shaking sobs he'd held back for years. Not just for Grace. For Anna. For the weight of always being strong. For the fear of failing the one person who needed him most. Across town, Grace packed up her penthouse. Not because she had to, but because it no longer felt like home. She moved into a smaller place near the river, walking instead of being driven, learning what quiet really sounded like. She thought often about forgiveness. Not of the board, not of the media, but of Ethan. Could she forgive him for choosing fear over her? Be honest for a moment. If you were in Grace's place, after everything she risked, could you forgive someone who walked away to protect you? Type forgive if you could find the strength, or never if the hurt would run too deep. The question haunted her. One afternoon, Lily's school called. "Mr. Cole," the principal said gently, "Lily hasn't been herself." She asked to speak with the counselor. Ethan arrived to find Lily sitting small in a big chair, eyes downcast. "I think I scared someone away," she whispered. Ethan knelt in front of her, heart breaking anew. "No, sweetheart. Grown-ups sometimes get lost. That's not your fault." "But you're sad," she said. "And when you're sad, the house feels quiet." That night, Ethan made a decision. He pulled out Grace's letter. The first one. Read it again. Then he wrote his own, hand shaking. "I thought loving you meant stepping aside. I was wrong. If forgiveness is possible, I'd like to ask for it." He didn't know if he'd ever send it. Fate, however, moved faster than fear. A charity gala was announced. Grace's foundation, independent now, focused on families and healthcare workers. The hospital encouraged staff attendants to show unity. Ethan almost didn't go, but Lily tugged his hand. "Maybe we should," she said. "Sometimes sorry needs to be seen." The gala hall glowed with soft light and quiet music. Grace stood at the podium, composed but changed, less polished, more real. Then her eyes found Ethan. Time slowed. After her speech, she stepped down, heart pounding, and walked straight toward him. They stood facing each other, surrounded by murmurs and music, alone in a crowd. "I got your letter," Grace said softly. Ethan's breath caught. "I didn't know if—" She raised a hand. "I'm not saying it fixes everything." Her voice trembled. "But I don't want to live a life where fear makes my choices." Tears blurred his vision. "Neither do I." She reached out, not to hold him yet, but close enough to feel warmth. In that moment, the world seemed to exhale, because forgiveness wasn't an ending. It was an opening. They didn't rush back into each other's lives. Grace and Ethan stood there for a long moment after the gala, neither touching, neither retreating, just breathing in the fragile truth that something broken had been gently set down instead of shattered. "I don't want promises," Grace said quietly. "I just want honesty. Even when it's hard." Ethan nodded. "That's all I have left to give." They walked out together into the cool night air. Lily skipped a few steps ahead, humming to herself, blissfully unaware of how carefully the adults behind her were stitching hope back together. The weeks that followed were different. Not easier, but real. Ethan's unpaid leave stretched on, but the foundation Grace had rebuilt quietly stepped in, offering him a facility supervisor role. Not because of who he knew, but because of his years of work and spotless record. He hesitated, pride flaring, until Grace stopped him gently. "This isn't rescue," she said. "It's recognition." He accepted. Grace, no longer shielded by power, learned humility in new ways. She attended meetings where her voice wasn't automatically obeyed. She listened more. She slept better. Some nights, she cooked with Lily, burning pasta, laughing through the smoke alarm. The tabloids moved on, as they always did. Life, however, stayed. One afternoon, Ethan came home to find Grace sitting on the floor with Lily, surrounded by construction paper and glue. "We're making stars," Lily announced, "for people who feel sad." Ethan's throat tightened. Grace looked up at him, her smile soft. "She says everyone deserves something bright." That night, as Lily slept, Ethan and Grace sat on a balcony overlooking the city. The river reflected scattered lights, imperfect but beautiful. "I used to think love was something you earned," Grace said, "or controlled. And I thought it was something you lost if you weren't careful enough," Ethan replied. They sat with that truth, letting it rest between them. "I'm scared sometimes," Grace admitted, "that the world will take this too." Ethan reached for her hand, slowly, asking without words. She let him. "So am I," he said, "but maybe that means it matters. If you believe love still wins, even when it's messy, even when it's afraid, comment, amend below. Let this space fill with hope tonight. Someone scrolling quietly might need to see that belief still exists." Spring came softly. Lily's science program flourished. She presented a project about stars and gravity, ending with a simple sentence: "Things pull us together even when we feel far apart." Grace watched from the audience, tears slipping free. Later, she turned to Ethan. She's extraordinary. She gets that from her mother, he said, then paused. And maybe from you too. Grace blinked, caught off guard. From me? You stayed, he said. That counts. Grace learned then that redemption wasn't grand gestures or public apologies. It was consistency. Showing up, again and again. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, gentler than the storm that started it all, Grace stood in the same hospital corridor where she had nearly died. The foundation was unveiling a new cardiac wing, named not after donors, but after first responders and hospital staff. Grace stepped aside and pulled Ethan forward. This man saved my life, she said simply. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. Applause filled the room, warm and genuine. Ethan glanced down, overwhelmed, then up at Grace. For the first time, he didn't feel smaller in her world. He felt equal. And as they stood there, hands intertwined, Lily between them, Grace realized something quietly profound. She hadn't been saved by a kiss. She'd been saved by kindness that asked for nothing in return. And Ethan realized that strength didn't mean standing alone. Sometimes it meant letting love stand with you. The applause faded, but the warmth stayed. Ethan stood in the hospital lobby long after the crowd thinned, staring at the plaque on the wall. His name wasn't there. Neither was Grace's. Instead, it read, "For those who show up when it matters most." He felt something loosen in his chest. Something he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for years. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale after that. There were still bills, still tired mornings, still moments when fear crept in quietly, asking what if. But the difference now was simple. He wasn't alone. Grace learned how to live without hiding behind success. Some days were humbling. Meetings where she wasn't the most powerful voice, invitations that no longer came. Yet every night, she came home to laughter, to Lily's endless questions, to a kind of peace no amount of money had ever bought. One evening, months later, Grace sat on the couch watching Ethan help Lily with homework. He leaned close, patient, explaining fractions with cereal pieces spread across the table. "You know," Grace said softly, "I used to think impact meant scale. Millions reached. Numbers." Ethan looked up. "And now," she smiled, "now I think impact looks like this." Lily looked up. "Like what?" Grace brushed hair from Lily's face. "Like someone taking time, even when they're tired." Lily nodded seriously. "That's love." Ethan and Grace exchanged a look, one filled with quiet awe how children often see truth faster than adults. Later that night, when Lily was asleep, Ethan stood on the balcony staring at the city lights. Grace joined him, wrapping a blanket around both of them. "I almost lost you," he said quietly. Grace rested her head against his shoulder. "I almost lost myself. Then you reminded me who I could be." The rain began again, soft, steady, nothing like the storm from that night long ago. The city breathed beneath it. If this story has stayed with you, pause here with them for a moment. Don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for entertainment, but for the man who carried grief and still chose kindness. One small click can be your way of saying, "I felt this. I see you." Time passed. Lily grew ayer, braver. She kept making stars out of paper, taping them to the fridge for bad days. Grace's foundation expanded not loudly, but deeply, funding CPR training for hospital staff, janitors included. Ethan often spoke at those sessions, nervous at first, then steady. "I didn't save a billionaire," he'd say. "I saved a person, just like you could." People listened, not because of the story, but because of the truth in his voice. One afternoon, years later, Ethan stood once more in the same hospital corridor. An emergency alarm rang out, urgent and sharp. Staff rushed past. This time he wasn't needed. Someone else knelt beside a patient. Someone else stepped in. Ethan watched, heart full, understanding the quiet miracle of it all. Kindness multiplies. That night at home, Grace placed a small box on the table. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "Open it." Inside was a simple ring. Nothing extravagant, just honest. I don't need promises of forever, Grace said, voice steady but emotional. I just want to keep choosing each other. Every day. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I choose you, he said, and I choose not be afraid anymore. Lily, watching from the hallway, gasped, does this mean we're a team forever? Grace knelt down. If you'll have me. Lily wrapped her arms around both of them. Good, because love should stick. And in that moment, everything felt complete, not perfect, but whole. The world outside kept spinning. Storms still came. Loss still existed. But so did this. A single dad janitor. A billionaire who learned how to be human. A child who believed in stars. And a truth simple enough to carry forward. You don't have to be powerful to change a life. You just have to show up and choose kindness, even when it's hard. That choice, quiet, brave, and human, is what changes everything.